calling to order this meeting. This is an additional meeting of the Committee of the Whole. I'm Phi Mendelson, Chair of the Council, Chair of the Committee of the Whole. Today is Thursday, June 25th, 2020. The time is 4:54 in the afternoon. And I'd like to say we're in the council chambers or in 412, but in fact, we're virtual. This is a markup of the recommendations of what some of us affectionately call the Little Committee of the Whole on the fiscal year 2021 budget and corresponding budget support act. I phrase it as little because this is recommendations with regard to the agencies that are under the purview of the Committee of the Whole, rather than the entire local budget act, which is will be before the council and the committee for markup on July 7th. Let me recognize Evan Cash to call the roll to determine that we have a quorum. Present.
Councilmember Allen.
Here.
Councilmember Bonds.
Here.
Councilmember Cheh.
Here.
Councilmember Gray. Councilmember Gray. Councilmember Grosso.
Present.
Councilmember McDuffie.
Here.
Councilmember Nadeau.
Here.
Councilmember Silverman.
Present.
Councilmember Todd. Councilmember Todd. Councilmember Robert White.
Present.
Councilmember Trayon White.
Present.
Mr. Chairman, you have a quorum.
Thank you. What I'm going to do is I'm going to summarize the report, I hope fairly quickly, ask for discussion, and then call for a vote on the report. Generally, the committee recommendations in this report are consistent with the mayor's proposed budget for fiscal year 2021. The exceptions I'm going to go through right now. With regard to the council, the proposed budget for the Council of the District of Columbia, the committee print and report that we have before us accepts funds from the Committee on Business and Economic Development to fund future needs with regard to racial equity initiatives at the council. And we intend to work with Councilmembers McDuffie and Todd on finalizing the REACH Act before the end of the fiscal year, and will examine the need for additional council resources. The committee also accepts a total of $75,000 in funds, 2/3 from the Committee on Health, 1/3 from the Committee on Housing and Neighborhood Revitalization, for a total of $75,000 to assist the Committee of the Whole with the Police Review Initiative adopted as part of the Comprehensive Policing and Justice Reform Emergency Amendment Act, which the council adopted on June 9th. With regard to the proposed budget for the District of Columbia Auditor, at the request of the auditor, the committee recommends shifting $300,000 in personal services funds to non-personal services contract funds. The intent is to allow the auditor to conduct additional contract audits that may benefit from outside expertise. In addition, the committee recommends a new subtitle in the Budget Support Act to transfer any unspent dollars in the auditor's budget at the end of the fiscal year into a non-lapsing fund. This will allow the auditor flexibility to conduct audits without regard to paying for a contract audit in a single fiscal year. We've provided such flexibility on an ad hoc basis in past budgets. This model is similar to the council's IT fund that holds unspent funds for IT projects. With regard to the proposed budget for the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments, the committee accepts funds from the Committee on Transportation and the Environment, $25,000 to send to the Council of Governments to support its agricultural task force. With regard to the budget for the Office of Planning, the committee accepts funds from the Committee on Transportation and the Environment for a planning study for the Chevy Chase neighborhood. I believe that's a small area plan. With regard to the budget for the Department of Consumer and Regulatory Affairs, the committee accepts funds from the Committee on the Judiciary and Public Safety to implement the Housing Conversion and Eviction Clarification Amendment Act of 2019, which requires DCRE to charge a new fee for building permits that cause a reduction in number of units in a building. Funding was necessary to make IT changes to charge the fee. So essentially, we're accepting the funding to enable this bill to be paid for and not be subject to appropriation. We get around to adopting it. And with all that I'm saying about this, just so everybody knows, the amount that we're talking about is $10,300. In addition, with regard to the Department of Consumer and Regulatory Affairs, What was circulated yesterday is going to be revised with regard to not including $1.15 million in SBR. It was an SBR adjustment related to velocity. That was in the report that was circulated. This came from the mayor's errata letter that stated fiscal year 2021 that adjustment should be made, when in fact it turns out that the errata letter had an errata and it was fiscal year 2020. So I think that's a technical matter, but I'm noting that we will adjust that. With regard to the budget for the University of the District of Columbia, the committee makes several enhancements to UDC to load in committed federal grant funds that were not included at the time of budget formulation. And similarly, with regard to the Office of State Superintendent of Education, the committee recommends several enhancements for OSSI that were forwarded to the committee, reflecting federal grant funds that were not included at the time of budget formulation. With regard to the several education agencies that are under the joint jurisdiction of the Committee of the Whole and the Committee on Education, while the committee report does have some commentary regarding the agencies, with regard to the fiscal matters, at this level of the Committee of the Whole, we're not addressing that at all, other than these, what I consider technical corrections for OSSI. We're not looking at DCPS or OSSI or Deputy Mayor for Education. With regard to the BSA subtitles, the committee recommends striking the following subtitles recommended by the mayor. Subtitle 1A, which concerns DGS reprogramming council review waiver. Subtitle 1B, which proposed option year contract advanced approval by the council. Subtitle 2H, concerning targeted historic preservation grants for Bloomingdale. We've scheduled a hearing on July 8th to move the bill rather than to wrap it into the Budget Support Act. Subtitle 3G, we are recommending be struck. And I believe this is the same recommendation that the Committee on Judiciary and Public Safety is making regarding the hiring of retired police officers. That subtitle would be struck. Subtitle 4F, proposed by the mayor to change or delete reporting requirements related to child development facilities and pre-K. Those reporting requirements, and we propose to strike that from the BSA. Subtitle 6B, DCRA special purpose account merger. My note here says retain provision related to green building fund. The committee recommends the following new subtitles. 1, Archives Advocacy Group to advise the council on the archives project. 2, Audit Engagement Fund to allow the auditor to retain unspent year-end funds. 3, a matching program for UDC fundraising. 4, Public Charter School funding. Funds charters at projected enrollment and adjusts quarterly payment schedules. We will continue to work on this between now and the July 7th Committee of the Whole action. And 5, Events DC GoGo Grant Making Authority in Events DC, similar to the cultural grants that we adopted last year. So those are the highlights or the changes. I move the report with leave for staff to make technical, conforming, and editorial changes as their discussion. I see we've been joined by Councilmember Gray, Councilmember Grosso, then Councilmember Allen.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank you and your staff for all the hard work that you've put in to developing these recommendations. I'm looking forward to supporting these recommendations today, especially considering how many of the recommendations and actions support DC history, artists, and culture. As most of my colleagues know, I've spent my time at the council supporting our arts and humanities stakeholders, and I'm pleased to see that the dedicated funding for the Commission on Arts and Humanities will remain intact once again, and hopefully for the distant future. I'm also supportive of your decision to keep the independence and structural reforms of the Commission that we adopted last year. The Commission has proven itself to be a viable, independent agency without the threat of political interference, and this is the kind of stability our arts and humanities communities have been seeking. The report makes several policy recommendations at the Commission, including assembling the Cultural Plan Steering Committee and coordination with the council to determine how best to implement the cultural plan and allocated resources accordingly. I funded the original cultural plan back in 2015, and while it's been frustrating to watch it stall for over a year, I look forward to realizing its full potential in the near future. This report also invests in DC history in two different ways. First, by establishing an advocacy group to advise the council on next steps, funding, and needs regarding the construction of a new DC archives facility. The current facility does not respect the needs of our historical documents. It does not allow for adequate research and exploration by academics and the public, and most of our archives are stuck in storage in the state of Maryland. I've been frustrated by the delays in building this facility, and I know many advocates have been too. The mayor's proposed capital improvement plan pushes back the $72 million investment by several years once again. So I'm very supportive of the Budget Support Act subtitle to establish this advocacy group and finally build a permanent state-of-the-art facility that will house numerous historical documents from DC and allow us to learn the lessons from the past to help shape our future. I'm also supportive of the grant program at Events DC to support go-go music, our official music. The Committee on Education, through a transfer from Councilmember McDuffie and the Business and Economic Development Committee, is also investing in the digitization, collection, and acquisitions of go-go archive at the DC Public Library, which is a very exciting development. Go-go is an essential part of our DC culture, and I'm proud of these investments the council is making to continue to highlight it as our official music. In terms of the education-related BSA subtitles, I do have questions. As you noted, you're going to work on these on the charter school stabilization subtitle. We can work together to discuss this, as you noted, and I'm sure, as for other folks in the in my office, has already worked with you in the general counsel's office to make thoughtful, deliberate changes to the education BSA subtitles that the Committee on Education literally just approved a few minutes ago. So I want to thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank your team. I believe that the work that you've done here is top notch, and I look forward to supporting and voting for this budget today. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Grosso. Councilmember Allen.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Just want to thank you and your entire team. Obviously, the last several months, including the budget, have been difficult, and just appreciate everyone's incredibly hard work to lead through this. A couple of quick comments on the budget. I was concerned to see the massive drop-off in housing code abatements, and I wholeheartedly support the committee's recommendation to review the proactive inspection program. I'm also remain skeptical of the third-party inspection system. I hope that over the next year, the committee will be able to continue looking closely at how DCRA is inspecting our housing code violations and property inspections more broadly. Overall, though, I do applaud DCRA for working more diligently to modernize and get more of our services online. I also want to thank you for accepting my committee's transfer of some one-time money to fund the Housing Conversion and Evictions Clarification Amendment Act. Look forward to further examining the impact of this legislation on consolidations of multi-bedroom, typically more affordable units, into more expensive units with fewer bedrooms. I do feel like I got a note, as we talked about last year. I remain skeptical about Events DC's unrestricted reserves. It seems that we continue to get conflicting stories about whether there's excess cash on hand. On the one hand, it's great for Events DC that it had plenty of money on hand to balance its budget. On the other, it's still hard to square Events DC's persistent insistence last year that it had no excess cash on hand with the reality this year of having not only an extra $79 million available to balance its budget, but then also another $18 million to provide, admittedly quite necessary though, relief for the hospitality industry. I do want to note, I do have some questions about one of the subtitles in the committee is recommending and adopting that I hope we can continue to work through as the conversation continues. There's a proposed subtitle that would fund public charter schools based on projected enrollment, not the audited actual enrollment that about 3/4 of its funding is currently based on. I do understand that it may be hard to get an accurate count if schedules are inconsistent or if a school is doing all or mostly distance learning. And maybe this part will come to pass and it might be true, but it seems like something we could do as an emergency if that did come to pass. I'm a little concerned about how this would work in terms of charters and the kids that are hard to engage through distance learning. I think there are good reasons for providing our per pupil funding based on different formulas in DCPS and the public charter sector. I think we'll know a little bit more about what schools will look like. So I just feel like this might be a bit premature and it might be worth waiting until the fall. I also want to thank you, though, and express my support for the committee's decision to strike several subtitles that would have seriously undermined the council's role in reviewing reprogrammings and options in existing contracts. And again, just grateful for the hard work that's gone into this and look forward to the next couple of weeks ahead as we hammer out the final details of the overall budget. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilmember Allen. Who else wants to be recognized? Councilmember Cheh and then Councilmember Gray.
Yes, thank you very much, Chairman Mendelson, and to your staff for the hard work in putting together this budget and report. I will be supporting the budget today, and there are a few recommendations that I am particularly supportive of. First of all, I'm proud that our two committees were able to work jointly, including the $150,000 in one-time funds to improve economic development opportunities in a small area plan in the Chevy Chase neighborhood. And although it's a small amount, it's an important amount, $25,000 in recurring dollars to the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments to support their regional food systems program. And as I know, you're very supportive of COG and my role on it, so that's very helpful. I'd like to take a few moments to discuss some changes to the budget in the report. I'm very much in favor of the action to establish and fund a group to advise the council regarding the development of the new District of Columbia Archives, as we've already heard, to fund the council equity assessment program called for in the Racial Equity Achieves Results Amendment Act, funding the Police Reform Board, which was as part of that emergency police bill that we passed, and enhance the budget for the DC auditor to complete additional contract audits. And just a moment about some Budget Support Act subtitles. I am very pleased to see the committee's recommendation to strike language proposed by the mayor that would expand the permissible uses of amounts in the Green Building Fund to include cost of abating nuisance properties and housing code violations. I very much support DCRA's efforts to address these housing code violations, but use of the Green Building Fund dollars for that purpose would fall well outside of the intended use of the monies in this fund. Second, the committee strikes the proposed BSA subtitle that would exempt reprogrammings within DGS Facilities Operations Program from council review, and I support the committee's decision to strike that subtitle. For years, DGS has used the facilities activity as a kind of slush fund to provide the agency with flexibility to move dollars around as it saw fit. But that behavior makes it really hard for us and the public to understand how DGS is intended to spend those dollars. And finally, I note that the committee did not strike two subtitles that would make two pieces of legislation subject to appropriation that the council has already funded. It's different if we haven't funded it, but subtitles that would make these pieces of legislation subject to appropriations. One is a permit fee waiver for use of the district's recreational spaces, which my committee funded last year, and the community restrooms pilot initiative. I know, we all know, that many programs and services had to be reduced or suspended this year because of the public health emergency. And given the price tag, I don't fault the committee for not reversing these cuts. However, every year, a number of bills passed by the council are left unfunded in the proposed budget. Now, the mayor seeks to take bills that the council has already funded, strip them of the funding, and then make them subject to appropriations again. Legislation passed by the council should not be viewed as discretionary budget items for the mayor to fund. If and when she sees fit, they are the law. And it's my hope and expectation that both of these programs will get full funding in the 2022 budget. Thank you very much, Mr. Mendelson, Chairman Mendelson, and congratulations to your staff for all their hard work.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Gray. You're muted, Mr. Gray.
Can you
Yes, hear you.
can hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, let me thank you for the work that you and your staff have done under some very difficult circumstances to be able to get us to the point where we are in this budget process. And I want to thank you also for the dollars that we will have available to be able to work with the findings of the police commission that the council, which I appreciated, joined Councilmember Bonds and I to be able to help to get enacted. I do want to ask you a question, Mr. Chairman. Perhaps you can clarify for me. I don't have the answers on that is, it appears to me that there was about $4 million, a little over $4 million reduced from a bill that I was a co-introducer for, and that is the birth to three legislation. I wonder if you can explain to me exactly what this means, Mr. Chairman. That is $4.037 million that looks like it's been reduced from the budget that would serve some of the very youngest of our children. And I don't really understand the details of it. So can you explain to me exactly what happened in this situation so we'll know going forward?
Mr. Gray, which agency budget are you looking at?
I think it's an honesty.
Okay. Well, the Committee of the Whole in this markup is not addressing the budgets for DCPS or OSSI. So the recommendation that will come out of this week's committee markups with regard to OSSI is the recommendation that came out of the Education Committee earlier. I don't know if Mr. Grosso wants to speak to this. I did note when I was summarizing the budget, what the Committee of the Whole is doing today, that we did add some federal grants into the OSSI budget. But other than we've done nothing in this markup with regard to OSSI or DCPS. We're silent.
Okay. Well, maybe I'll take you up on that offer, Mr. Chairman. That is to ask Councilmember Grosso if he can explain. Again, if there's $4 million that's being eliminated from the OSSI budget that was for children who are in the 0 to 3 population, I'm really at this stage trying to understand exactly what has happened here. So, Mr. Grosso, could you explain, if you would, what happened in this situation?
Thank you very much for the question. You know, I'm asking my staff right now as we speak to give me an explanation on this.
Okay.
I am not clear of any deduction that's been happening that came through the committee. So let me go back and look at it. And if you'll just give me some time, I can get you an answer.
I'd appreciate that very much. As you know, because you worked with us on this, the support for our very youngest children has been a huge priority of mine and yours as well, for that matter. And my staff has indicated to me that we seem to have lost $4.037 million in funds along the way. And I truthfully don't understand this. I follow this stuff pretty closely, but this isn't one that I can really speak to at all. And I just want to understand before we vote exactly what has happened to these dollars, and certainly would appreciate any enlightenment you can provide on this, because I nearly fell over when I got this information from my staff indicating that we were losing this level of dollars.
Well, I'm happy to look forward. And in fact, it could be something to do with federal dollars as well. And, the errata letter noted that they had come up with some shortage of about $5 million that they had done mistakenly.
Yeah.
And we were able to replenish about 1.4 million of that in our budget to go back towards subsidies to try to replenish it. But you know how those errata letters are. The mayor says, "Oh, I made a mistake," and I'm supposed to come up with $5 million, which I just don't have. So that could be what your staff is pointing at here, and certainly I would not support. It could be that the budget office maybe can support us here and can let us know what's going on. Maybe if we can, Mr. Chairman, ask the budget director, Ms. Budoff, if she'd be willing to check it out. Let us know what's going on.
I see her shaking her head vigorously, so maybe she can, if you would give her an opportunity, maybe she can explain it to us, Mr. Grosso, if you will give her that opportunity.
Please, that would be great.
Ms. Budoff, do you want to speak to this?
Sure, my pleasure. I believe what you're referring to is the Early Head Start Home Visiting Grants
Right.
Amendment Act of 2020. And this was in the BSA as proposed by the mayor. So this was a $4 million reduction that the mayor made that came to the council. And what it does is it, last year in the budget, as I'm sure you remember, we funded about $4 million of home visits through OSSI. And what this subtitle does is it removes the funding for those home visiting services in FY21. My understanding is that OSSI had not commenced actually doing these home visits. But regardless, this was not an action that the council took. This was an action that was taken by the mayor and reflected in the budget that was sent to us.
So the early Head Start programs, you know, we've looked at those as a part of the birth to three services that we were providing. What I'm trying to understand now is exactly what will be the impact on birth to three services as a result of the removal of these dollars that apparently ostensibly won't be available anymore. Is that right, Ms. Boudon?
Correct. It made them.
So
if I can speak to this, okay, Jen, there was silence. I don't know if you had more to say.
No.
In terms of the budget, it was reflected in the budget as submitted by the mayor.
yeah.
The committee of the whole in this markup is not marking up the OSSI budget in that regard. And the Committee on Education, as I understand it, did not make a change with regard to this aspect of the mayor's proposal. There is also a subtitle in the BSA, and that subtitle is Title 4H. And in this report, the committee is supporting the adoption of the subtitle. If we don't support the adoption of the subtitle, then the budget is not balanced. The language, as I understand it in the subtitle, changes shall to may, as in OSSI may award a grant or contract for a nonprofit organization to provide early Head Start.
Okay, so who's, to the extent that people have been getting these dollars, I assume they have.
No.
No.
They have not.
If I understand what the budget director said, the program was new enough that no awards had been given.
So no organization that we know of will be affected by this. Is that what you're saying, Mr. Chairman?
That's my understanding. That's what I'm saying based on my understanding.
Okay.
My understanding is wrong.
No, I think you're right, Mr. Chairman. That's what the Office of State Superintendent, I think, has made that clear. And I think also it's important to note that you have in your budget, Mr. Chairman, though, permitted them to do more federal grants, I believe, for this work that they're doing. They put the grants out. So to receive more federal dollars to support early child care centers. And we in our budget, like I said, added as much as we possibly could to subsidies. So we're still trying to support these organizations and these groups as much as we can. But the mayor did change that in her BSA.
So is it accurate then, Mr. Grosso, to say that there's no organization, no nonprofit organization, no child serving organization that we know of that will be affected in fiscal year 21 by whatever changes are being made?
Well, it would depend on what you mean by the word affected. I mean, the reality is that if they had been expecting them to do this in the sense that they were required to do it, then I think they might feel like they were affected. But then since this money had not been put out there and had not been promised, then I don't feel like anyone will be affected.
So it isn't as if, I'm just trying to make sure I'm understanding. I don't want to mistake where we are at this point, but I want to make sure I'm clear that no organization that currently is receiving money will receive less as a result of this. Is that fair to say?
I believe that is fair to say. And remember, if the money does come available, they will still be able to put this out there if it comes available. But at this point, they did not believe that the project was underway enough, and so no one is going to be impacted.
Okay.
If you would like, if between now and the first reading on July 7th, we can get a further explanation from Ossie on this so that you're clear on it.
I would appreciate that, Mr. Grosso, very much. As you know, we've gone through a real exercise and explanations around the Head Start dollars in the first place. I think it was $14 million we were slated to lose for next year. And the chancellor told us that he didn't think it would have any impact, for example, on any seats, any pre-K seats. These not pre-K dollars that we're talking about here. These are dollars that for a younger population. So I would appreciate getting from you, as clear an explanation as we can get at this stage, because I know if there are organizations that have been affected by it, they'd be virtually overrunning us at this stage to correct the atrocity that they will have perceived as having happened here. So I look forward to you getting back to me, and I'll appreciate that very much.
I'm happy to do that, Chairman Gray. And in the end, nobody wants to see anybody lose any money here, so we'll do the best we can to figure this out. And I will just remind everyone that the Head Start money was entirely within DCPS. There's still Head Start money for other CBOs out there and other organizations that they're still operating under their normal contract, but this was just within DCPS. Now, what you're talking about, I think, is a little different, but thank you. We'll make sure you get what you need.
Thank you very much, Mr. Grosso. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Gray. Is there further discussion on the report and its recommendations? Councilmember Nadeau.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for all the hard work you and your staff have done to produce this budget in a challenging period. I want to highlight my support for the funding allocated to a council equity assessment program for the upcoming fiscal year, which is something I've long supported. And though I push myself and my office to work with intention towards equity every day, the significance of a council-wide equity assessment is tremendous. If we have fiscal impact statements, we should have racial impact statements. To me, it's that simple. I really want to thank Councilmember McDuffie for leading on these efforts and for continually pushing us to be better on matters of race equity. I also want to thank you, Chairman, for using this markup to state your commitment to taking on the remainder of the comprehensive plan this year after we finish the budget. For those of you who aren't aware, today we learned that we lost our case in court regarding the Park Morton development at Bruce Monroe, which is a significant setback for residents and public housing and emphasizes more than ever the importance of getting the comprehensive plan right and doing so in a timely manner. I look forward to working closely with you, Chairman, and the rest of the council on the comp plan this year as we did with the framework. I'm also pleased to see that the Office of Planning is bringing more work in-house, both as a cost-saving measure and to ensure a quality and consistency of product as we engage in more small area plans and other studies. I don't want to comment on the whole report. I know we have a lot to get through, but last I want to say that I'm thrilled to see your addition of a subtitle to set aside at least $1 million per year from Events DC for go-go related grants. Since we voted to make go-go the official music of the district, it's time to put our money where our mouth is. Once again, I want to thank you, your staff, and the Council Budget Office, and look forward to seeing the priorities in this budget realized in the upcoming year. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Nadeau. Is there further discussion? Councilmember Robert White.
Thank you, Chairman. I do want to thank you and your staff for incredible work on this budget, as everybody has stated, because it's true. This is just a particularly difficult budget year, not just because of the low revenues, but because it wasn't expected when all of us really started planning budget priorities. And so it's caused a significant amount of readjustment. And I appreciate the way that you have fit these pieces together. Just a couple things I want to highlight or re-highlight. The non-lapsing fund that will allow the DC auditor additional flexibility to initiate unplanned audits at the request of the council is just particularly helpful and needed for the work that we do and the accountability and transparency that we need. It really will create a mechanism for increased government transparency. The subtitle E, which authorizes the Events DC to make grants to support go-go artists and music, really commend Councilmember McDuffie for his work in getting this done, and the committee of the whole for pushing forward with this. These are artists and musicians that often are left out, even in a city with a very rich music industry. Our kind of music that is native to DC is often left out. The policy recommendation for the Commission on Arts and Humanities that encourages the Commission to conduct targeted outreach is so important. We've heard from a number of residents, particularly in minority communities, that artists and musicians often don't know about funding and partnership opportunities. So this certainly is a needed step in the right direction. And the Archives Advocacy Group with jurisdiction over the Department of General Services, certainly I hear a lot from residents and organizations, a lot of frustration about the delays and unknowns in the future of the archives, which is desperately needed to preserve the history of our city. I just really think this will move us in a better direction. There are a number of things that, of course, in every committee, and the committee of the whole is no exception, that we wish we could have funded or wish we could have funded more. I hope that we will continue to work together to try to see if there is some flexibility to meet some of the needs that we haven't been able to meet. But I do look forward to voting in favor of this budget. And again, thank you and your team for the work that you've done.
Thank you, Councilmember. If there's no further discussion, we have-
Councilmember, this is Trayon White.
Mr. Chairman,
Councilmember,
Mr. Chairman.
this is Trayon White.
All right, let me recognize Trayon White and then Kenya McDuffie.
Thank you, Chairman. I want to thank you and your staff. I know this has been a very trying time and season for DC and for the council in an extended amount of time in the building, despite us telling us to get out the building. So I know you're working very hard on behalf of the city. So I want to thank you. And I know the committee of the whole oversees about 30 agencies. I will address a few items for the sake of time. As a councilman in Ward 8, I'm very familiar with the needs to ensure that DCRA inspectors are available to inspect and cite bad actors. So I agree with the community of whole's recommendation that DCRA conduct proactive and random inspections, blitzes, and inspect areas with high volumes of complaints, because I know I get quite a share of them. I also agree with DCRA must move its business process to track bad actors to ensure compliance with fines. However, the current budget only provides one full-time position. There are only 25 housing code inspectors and residential inspectors in the line item. We need more inspectors and more bad actors need to be targeted, or this will continue to be an issue for DC residents. Also agree with the recommendation that DCRA increase the number of housing inspectors. Through the hard work of the community whole, a time sweep of $49 million was found in excess reserves that should have reverted to the district general fund from Vince DC. These additional dollars will allow for housing authority to conduct critical maintenance repairs for units of residents with low income. Funding will be available for the mayor's proposed 0.80 per room on tax and hotels. I do want to acknowledge that I am concerned. I know this committee is also connected to the Committee on Education. We talk about equity. We talk about Black Lives Matter and addressing the racial disparities in the city. And at the basis of any community or culture or ethnicity in the community is education. I'm disappointed today to see that Ballou Senior High School, where enrollment has increased 4.5%, but the budget is $788,293 less than the FY20 revised budget. Ballou High School and Lecky have projected increase in students enrollment, but still have budget decreases compared to the FY20 budget. And additionally, Anacostia High School, with enrollment increased by 15.2%, and the budget decreased to overall $527,000 compared to the FY20 revised budget. Decreases also happened at Kramer Middle School, Malcolm X Elementary School, Stanton Elementary School, where all the schools had increased enrollment but decrease in funding. This is not equity. This is injustice. And if we as a city are sending a message to our kids that they don't matter, this is the prime way to do it. And so as a council member representing Ward 8, I'm totally disheartened by the direction we're going in as we talk about the purple funding formula. And we have to figure out a way to make it equitable. I know there's dollars for at-risk funding, but at the basis of it, we're falling behind, and then we have to depend on additional funding to even level the playing field. And Ward 8, like Ward 7, is home to the most youth in Washington, D.C., and has some of the highest health, wealth, equity displacement or discrepancies in the city. And so we have to do better. This is totally unacceptable. So I want to say that in the spirit of equity conversations on this call and in the hearings, I'm hearing them, now is the time with the budget. We went from a $15.5 billion budget to a $16.7 billion budget. And yet again, at a council hearing in Washington, D.C., the nation's capital, we're talking about money being cut for schools in Washington, D.C. again. So we're going to continue to fight. I'm not happy about it, but I look forward to working with my colleagues to try to fix these inequities in the system that continuously cripple Black lives in D.C. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember White. I understood from my staff that schools did not see a reduction, so we will look at that. What were the schools you mentioned? Anacostia, Ballou, Kramer, Malcolm X, and I think there was one other.
Stanton.
And you're saying each of those saw...
And Lucky.
And each of those saw a reduction in their budget while their enrollment is going up?
Yes.
We will take another look at that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember White. Councilmember McDuffie.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank you, as everybody else has done, you and your staff for your work on this budget proposal. Every year, the council staff is making some really difficult decisions on what programs and projects we fund and how we support our priorities. I think this year, and most would agree, has been particularly an exceptional year given the economic impacts of COVID-19 and the deep cuts already made in the mayor's fiscal year 21 budget that she sent down to the council. This year's budget cycle, in terms of a process and the parameters imposed, have further truncated the realm of possibilities typically offered in the various committees. I also want to mention, and I think this is important, that despite all the challenges, our budget is still seen as a moral document, and it is a moral document. The priorities we choose to fund, or not to fund for that matter, are the true representations of the values in which we raise up. And while each of us have had to make, I think, some really tough decisions, the essence of that statement remains true. I want to highlight just a couple of things. You've done a number of I think, really important things in this budget, but there are two that I want to highlight. As everybody knows, go-go is the official music of DC, and this council made it so. We took a significant step in recognizing go-go as our homegrown genre of music, and for that, we should all be proud. I joined you, Mr. Chairman, at the oversight hearing for the Commission on Arts and Humanities. I raised a number of concerns about the city's lack of investment in our go-go economy. I also raised concerns about, the application for grants, asking about people's criminal background. You also raised a number of important questions about the role of the Arts Commission, as well as other agencies for that matter, in supporting go-go. And I think it was a really helpful process for me, and I really appreciate your clear support for go-go in this budget and for identifying funding in the budget of Events DC. And so I want to thank you for that. I want to thank your staff, and I also want to thank Natalie Hopkinson, Ron Moten, and the countless others with Don't Mute DC who showed up to let the world know what go-go means to the nation's capital. Mr. Chairman, I also want to recognize that you and I have had many extensive conversations around how we advance racial equity in the District of Columbia. Whether it was the initial sense of the council that every member of this council signed on to, or ensuring that the district became a member of the Government Alliance on Racial Equity, also ensuring all of our colleagues had the opportunity to receive racial equity training and their staff as well. incorporating racial equity language into the comprehensive plan framework elements, or when it came time to introduce legislation to codify racial equity into the fabric of how the district operates, you have been supportive. And every member of this council, frankly, has stepped up and really been supportive. And so I appreciate that. And I thank you for your partnership and the collaborative effort and spirit of every member of this body. We've identified and dedicated over $5 million to support the Racial Equity Achieved Results Act. And this is a monumental investment and will place the district amongst other jurisdictions that are leading the nation in advancing racial equity. I also want to take the opportunity to thank the organizations like Bread for the City, Consumer Health Foundation, the ACLU, Martha's Table, Empower DC, Black Lives Matter, and the rest of the 50 DC-based organizations under the umbrella of DC Initiative on Racial Equity in Local Government that have worked with me and my staff and have been extraordinarily supportive of the council's efforts to fund and pass the REACH Act. This budget acknowledges their efforts and their partnership with the council. Again, I want to thank each of my colleagues for your support of REACH Act, your support of GOGO, and I look forward to working with you, Mr. Chairman, as well as Councilmember Brandon Todd, to ensure that the council takes these significant steps towards achieving racial equity for every resident in the District of Columbia. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember McDuffie. If there's no further discussion, we will proceed to a vote. What is before us is the report and recommendations to the Committee of the Whole on the fiscal year 2021 budget and corresponding Budget Support Act subtitles, with leave for staff to make technical, conforming, and editorial changes. I think we have to call a roll just to double check or to be certain. Mr. Cash, would you call the roll?
Chairman Mendelson.
Yes.
Councilmember Nadeau. Councilmember Nadeau.
Yes.
Councilmember Silverman.
Yes.
Councilmember Todd.
Yes.
Councilmember Robert White.
Yes.
Councilmember Trayon White.
Present.
Councilmember Allen.
Yes.
Councilmember Bonds.
Yes.
Councilmember Cheh.
Yes.
Councilmember Gray. Councilmember Gray.
Yes.
Councilmember Grosso.
Yes.
Councilmember McDuffie.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, there are 11 yeses and 1 present.
The report is approved. I want to thank my staff, Blaine Stum, Evan Cash, Christina Sutlow, Lakeisha Jordan, Julia Coster, Destiny Price, for their work through the budget season. Been a little different this year, and I'm sure that each of you have seen the same with your committee staffs. I also want to thank Ann Phelps and Jen Budoff and the entire budget office for their help, and I will thank them again on July 7th. Jamie Latinen and the Office of Revenue Analysis team for helping us, and I'll probably thank them again unless I don't like their fiscal impact statements on July 7th. I want to thank Dan Golden, Laura Mendonça, and the General Counsel's Office for their help, the Office of the Secretary, of course. I want to as well note that tomorrow, the House of Representatives has scheduled debate and vote on the HR 51, the New Columbia Statehood Admission Act. And on Monday, we will be meeting, all the council members will be meeting in a work session. It'll be our first virtual work session on the budget. I expect it will be similar to last year, a little disorganized. I will not be serving pizza because I will not be doing deliveries to each of you. The office will prepare the presentation and we will go through it committee by committee. I will give you a hint, the budget office will decide the order in which the committees present their report. So everybody knows of the date and you should have the entire day blocked off for this. And with that, I don't believe there are any other announcements and there's no other business. The time is 5:43 in the afternoon and this meeting is adjourned.